Tributes continue to pour in from world leaders, remembering a pope who promised a more compassionate Catholic Church through diplomacy and outreach. In his final Easter message, Pope Francis continued that work, denouncing violence in global conflicts and pushing for peace in Gaza and Ukraine. But it was Pope Francis's empathy and advocacy for migrants in Europe and the United States that caused a clash with Vice President J.D. Vance, who was one of the last world leaders to have a papal meeting. Joining us now, New York Times chief White House correspondent and MSNBC political analyst Peter Baker, and former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See and current John Courtney Murray University chair in public service at Loyola University, Miguel Diaz. Peter, I want to start with you. President Trump has ordered flags across the country to fly at half-staff in tribute to the Pope's passing. But Pope Francis found himself at odds with the Trump administration not infrequently, and particularly most recently with J.D. Vance. What more can you tell us about the relationship and how that meeting went and how each side characterized it? Because it seemed very different depending on whose readout you were reading.
Yeah, look, it was a tense relationship. I think a lot of the policies that President Trump advanced were anathema to Pope Francis way back in the beginning of Trump's presidential, elevation in 2016. He talked about building a wall, of course, at his rallies. And the Pope says those who talk about building walls rather than bridges, they're not Christian. And President Trump, then candidate Trump, fired back saying, well, it's disgusting to question somebody's faith. So they had a bad start, let's say, to that relationship. He did visit the Pope in 2017. They had, by all accounts, a convivial enough time together. But over the years, you're right, the Pope has been critical either directly or elliptically of some of the policies that Trump has put into place, particularly with regard to immigration, policies that the Pope considered to be less than empathetic. And the president has bristled at that. At the same time, he understands that his base includes an awful lot of Catholics. A lot of Catholics support President Trump. So he's been careful to not go too far at times. And he did put out a statement of condolence today. But it was a short and very concise one, simply saying, rest in peace. May God bless all those who loved him.
I mean, Peter, but this wasn't the only place that the Pope weighed in on a lot of global affairs. In 2021, he actually cautioned Christians against using the Bible to justify political views. I think we have that sound for you.
It disturbs me when I hear Christians who say verses from the Bible and try and use them to bring the Lord into support of that particular message. It's not just a question of remembering the words. We have to remember with our heart. We have to open our hearts so that we hear the words that the Lord is speaking to us here and now.
Peter, especially compared to his predecessor, it seems like he was much more politically active. What can you tell us about his diplomacy, how big of an impact it had, and how other world leaders are reacting to his passing?
Yeah, it was a more politically active Pope in a lot of senses. Certainly more, on the side of the liberals' order of things on many issues like climate change, like immigration, even on issues like gay rights, where he was at least a little bit more, talking about compassion rather than condemnation. I was covering his visit to the United States in 2015 when he visited with Barack Obama, then the president, and the two of them shared some of the same priorities when it came to social justice. At the same time, of course, the church and American liberals are still obviously on different sides when it comes to issues like abortion and family issues, traditional family issues. And he was, of course, the leader of that church, so they didn't always see eye to eye with even people like President Obama. But clearly, I think for Americans, Catholics, particularly on the liberal side, he was somebody who gave voice to the priorities that they espoused. They gave voice to the values as they saw the church, should be espousing. And I think that he stood apart from some of his predecessors in that regard.
Ambassador, can you talk to us about why migrants, immigration was such an important issue for this Pope? Why was it such a big driver and something he spoke out on so often?
We have to first and foremost think where he comes from, right? He, a child of Italian immigrants, lived in Argentina, a country in Latin America continent that has been experiencing migrations on an ongoing basis for a number of reasons. I myself, I'm a Cuban American, a child of migrants, and could identify with the desperate flight of migrants across the world. We also have to remember that the very first thing that he does back in 2013 when he leaves Rome, goes to the island of Lampedusa. We can perhaps, draw a parallel between Lampedusa and our Ellis Island here and the Statue of Liberty and what that means for us as a nation that welcomes immigrants. But in that visit, he issued a statement embraced the concept that would become a signature for his papacy, which is a denunciation of the globalization of human indifference. He said at that point, I have his quote in front of me, "We are a society which has forgotten how to weep, how to experience compassion, suffering with others. The globalization of indifference has taken from us the ability to weep." And I think those words are as significant then as they are now, as we continue to struggle with the ongoing displacement of thousands around us and around the world. And really this papacy, his particular voice has been from the very beginning a voice that was trying to draw the attention to the displaced, to the marginalized, to the environmental crisis. And as Peter said, yes, in his famous statement, "Who am I to judge?" He also drew from his compassionate heart to welcome and to draw attention to the suffering of LGBTQ plus persons, and has met with trans persons throughout his papacy. And so I think that this Pope will be remembered as someone who put mercy first, who put the human person in human persons and their concrete human conditions before laws, before principles and precepts, and wanted us to do the same. Wanted us to encounter our humanity and to humanize one another rather than to demonize each other.
Yeah, it seems like empathy and forgiveness were really big parts of his ministry. And we talked a little bit about his background. He was the first Latin American pope. He was the first from the global south. He studied chemistry at university. We talked about him microwaving his food on his own earlier. He also used to ride the subway when he was cardinal in Buenos Aires. And this all kind of contributed to this brand he had as the people's pope. Can you talk about how he related to people on a human level and how that impacted how the world saw him and the impact he had on the world?
Look, I'll share a story I had a couple of years ago. There's an initiative that 4 of us from Loyola University of Chicago, 4 professors, along with Dr. Emil Secuda, who's the secretary for the Pontifical Commission for Latin America, spearheaded. And we've been having these conversations with Pope Francis and students from around the world. And I had an opportunity to, along with the other 4 professors from here, from Chicago, Loyola University of Chicago, to visit him because the event has been so successful. And I had an opportunity to sing to him one of the famous tangos from Latin America, "Adiós muchachos, compañeros de mi vida." And, in his jovial personality, he broke out into laughter. And we had a conversation that was both light, but also very serious about the challenges of our times. In that conversation, he drew from his Ignatian, it's the first Jesuit Pope, as you mentioned, his Ignatian spirituality, and called us. He said, what we need is not to condemn the youth, not to hit them with the laws. We need to really listen. We need to listen to their experiences, to their struggles. We ought not to start with these rules and regulations. And there he echoed, the Jesuit, dimension of his papacy, which is to really try as much as we can to encounter the sacred, to encounter God in every human living being, in every neighbor, in everyone around us, rather than to begin with a word of condemnation and a word of exile towards those around us. And so I think that he leaves that legacy and an invitation for each one of us, whether we're believers or not, for those of us that care about humanity, to really turn to our neighbors and to see them as human beings rather than as animals, or rather than as objectify them or demonize them and expel them from our immediate milieu, or from our countries, or from the global community of nations. And so I think that's his both diplomatic and his religious legacy to all of us.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Peter Baker and Ambassador Miguel Diaz, thank you both so much.